There's a video, or more accurately, at least 6 nearly identical versions of the same video, circulating right now claiming that Zahi Hawass, Egypt's most famous archaeologist, has finally broken decades of silence and confessed to hidden chambers, a mysterious machine, or an entire lost civilization buried beneath the Great Sphinx. The titles are almost interchangeable. Before I die, I need to tell the truth. Zahi Hawass finally reveals the machine hidden beneath the Sphinx. Just now, Zahi Hawass found a machine under the Sphinx. Different thumbnails, same invented confession, all built around the same fabricated idea that a man who has spent his entire career denying these claims suddenly, secretly, admitted they were true all along, often framed as a dramatic private confession delivered late in life, as though the man had finally decided to unburden himself of a secret he'd carried for decades. Here's what actually happened instead, and it's almost the exact opposite of what these videos claim. As recently as this year, Hawass has continued publicly rejecting these exact theories, on the record, by name. When a viral claim spread earlier this year, suggesting radar had detected a second hidden sphinx buried beneath the Giza Plateau, drawing something like 10 million views on a single social media post, Hawass didn't confess to anything. He called it a fabrication. Newsweek ran a formal fact check on that specific claim and rated it false, noting plainly that no excavation has taken place, no peer-reviewed study has validated the interpretation, and Egyptian authorities have never approved or announced any such discovery. Multiple Egyptologists and geophysics experts, examining the exact same radar data being promoted in these viral claims, concluded that the methods being used simply cannot reliably detect the kind of detailed structures being claimed at the depths being claimed, since ground-penetrating radar and related remote sensing techniques typically resolve only shallow features a few meters beneath the surface, not the kind of large, deeply buried megastructures these claims describe. Hawass's own quoted words on this were direct and unambiguous, not hedged or ambiguous in the way you'd expect from someone quietly signaling a hidden truth. He described the underlying rumors about columns and hidden structures beneath the pyramids and Sphinx as fabrications propagated specifically by individuals with no expertise in ancient Egyptian civilization or the actual history of these monuments, according to his own statement reported directly by Newsweek. That's about as far from a secret confession as a public statement can possibly get. This isn't a case of me telling you a video is probably exaggerated. This is a formally investigated, publicly documented, named expert-confirmed fabrication, and the confession video you're describing is simply repackaging that same debunked claim with an invented quote attached to make it feel more dramatic, swapping Hawass's actual, on-record rejection for a fictional admission that fits the video's preferred narrative instead. So let's set the fake confession aside entirely and talk about what's actually known and genuinely still debated about the Great Sphinx, because the real story here doesn't need an invented deathbed confession to be worth your attention. The Great Sphinx sits on the Giza Plateau just outside Cairo, and it's a genuinely staggering piece of ancient engineering. 73 meters long from paw to tail, 20 meters tall, 90 meters wide at its rear haunches, carved from a single continuous mass of limestone bedrock, rather than assembled from separate blocks, making it, by most measures, the oldest known monumental sculpture in Egypt and one of the most recognizable statues anywhere in the world. That single fact, that it's carved directly from the living rock of the plateau itself rather than built up piece by piece, is central to understanding both how it was made and why archaeologists have been able to reconstruct its construction history with such unusual precision. Here's how that construction process actually worked, according to decades of careful, published archaeological research. Ancient workers identified a natural limestone outcrop on the plateau, one already roughly shaped by wind erosion over thousands of years into something resembling a ridge, according to Egyptian geologist Farouk El-Baz, who has specifically suggested the Sphinx's head may have been carved first, taking advantage of a naturally occurring formation called a yardang, a wind-sculpted rock ridge that can sometimes already resemble the rough outline of an animal shape, before any human tool ever touches it. Rather than hauling in stone from elsewhere, workers carved directly downward around this existing formation, cutting a deep U-shaped trench, essentially an excavated quarry ditch, around what would become the statue's body, gradually freeing the recumbent lion shape from the surrounding bedrock, while leaving the sculpture itself still solidly attached to the ground beneath it. Workers used copper chisels for finer shaping and dolerite pounding stones, the same volcanic hammering technique used at Egyptian granite quarries elsewhere in the country, to remove the bulk of the surrounding stone, ultimately displacing several thousand tons of limestone in the process. An enormous undertaking for a civilization working entirely without iron tools or any form of mechanical lifting equipment beyond simple levers, ropes, and human muscle. What happened to all that displaced stone is where this story gets genuinely clever, and it's also exactly how archaeologists eventually proved, with remarkable scientific precision, who actually built the Sphinx and when. In the early 1980s, archaeologist Mark Lehner, working alongside geologist Thomas Aigner, conducted an extraordinarily detailed stone-by-stone mapping project across the entire Sphinx enclosure and its adjoining temple, a painstaking undertaking that required documenting the precise geological composition of hundreds of individual limestone blocks. Their approach involved something almost like a geological fingerprinting technique, examining the specific fossil content and layering patterns within individual limestone blocks used to build the nearby Sphinx temple, and comparing those fossil signatures directly against the exposed rock layers still visible today inside the quarry ditch surrounding the Sphinx itself. Limestone forms in distinct horizontal layers over geological time, each layer containing its own particular mixture of ancient marine fossils. And because those fossil assemblages vary meaningfully from one layer to the next, matching a specific block's fossil content to a specific layer within the quarry ditch functions almost like matching a fingerprint left at a crime scene. Precise, physical, and extremely difficult to fake or misinterpret. The match was precise enough to demonstrate conclusively that the blocks used to build the temple had been quarried directly out of the Sphinx enclosure, meaning the Sphinx and its adjoining temple were carved and constructed as a single, unified building project, using the exact material excavated in the process of carving the Sphinx as the raw material for the temple standing directly in front of it. As Smithsonian Magazine summarized the finding, the fossil fingerprints showed that the blocks used to build the temple wall must have come from the very ditch surrounding the Sphinx, apparently hauled away using ropes and wooden sledges by the same workers actively engaged in carving the statue itself. That single piece of evidence carries enormous weight because the neighboring Valley Temple, sitting immediately next to the Sphinx enclosure, has long been securely attributed to the pharaoh Khafra, based on statues and inscriptions recovered from within it, including a striking, life-sized statue of Khafra himself, carved from black volcanic stone, discovered by French archaeologist Auguste Mariette back in 1853. Since the Sphinx enclosure is spatially and architecturally integrated with Khafra's Causeway and Valley Temple, forming part of the same designed royal landscape connecting his pyramid to the edge of the cultivated Nile floodplain, and since Lehner and Aigner's fossil fingerprinting work tied the Sphinx's own construction material directly to that same building complex, the mainstream Egyptological conclusion is that the Sphinx was carved as part of Khafra's broader construction program, dating to somewhere around 2500 BC during Egypt's Old Kingdom, roughly the same era that produced the pyramids at Giza. There's genuine archaeological evidence, too, that the Sphinx project was never actually completed. In 1978, working in a corner of the Sphinx's quarry ditch, Hawass and Lehner discovered 3 large stone blocks, apparently abandoned mid-transport, exactly as ancient laborers had been dragging them toward the Sphinx temple. Nearby, archaeologists also recovered the leftover remnants of a workman's lunch and toolkit, fragments of a beer or water jar alongside stone hammers, suggesting workers simply walked away from an active task and never returned to finish it. A small, almost startlingly human detail preserved by pure accident across 4,500 years. The northern edge of the surrounding ditch shows a shelf of only partially quarried bedrock, decreasing in width from east to west, further reinforcing the picture of an ambitious project that was cut short before full completion. Construction debris was apparently never fully cleared from inside the Sphinx temple either, and notably, no titles belonging to any priest or priestess dedicated specifically to the Sphinx appear anywhere among the hundreds of surviving Old Kingdom tomb inscriptions at Giza, suggesting a formal religious cult built around the Sphinx may never have actually been established during the era it was originally built, perhaps because the broader construction project simply ran out of time, resources, or royal attention before it could be fully realized and formally consecrated. It would take over 1,000 years until the reign of Pharaoh Thutmose IV for the Sphinx to receive renewed royal attention. According to inscriptions from that later period, commemorated on what's known today as the Dream Stele, positioned directly between the Sphinx's paws, Thutmose cleared away sand that had gradually buried the monument up to its shoulders over the intervening centuries and established a formal religious cult dedicated to Hor-Im-Akhet, meaning Horus in the horizon, a name directly linking the ancient monument to solar worship. Physical evidence of that later restoration effort survives today. Mud brick construction from Thutmose's own enclosure wall still physically blocks an older drainage channel that predates the Sphinx enclosure itself, a channel Lehner's research suggests originally served an entirely different purpose before the Sphinx quarry was ever cut, since no ancient builder would have deliberately designed a drainage channel to empty directly into a ditch they hadn't yet decided to excavate. Now, it's worth being fully honest that not every single detail about the Sphinx's history is settled beyond any dispute, because that honest uncertainty is exactly the kind of nuance these fabricated confession videos deliberately erase in favor of manufactured drama. There is a genuine, still-live academic question over which specific Old Kingdom pharaoh commissioned the Sphinx. While Khafra remains the mainstream consensus, based on the temple attribution and the fossil matching evidence just described, a respected minority position within Egyptology, advanced most notably by scholar Rainer Stadelmann, argues instead for Khufu, Khafre's father and the builder of the Great Pyramid, based on stylistic and iconographic details in the statue's face and headdress. This is a real, ongoing scholarly disagreement between named, credentialed researchers working from shared physical evidence, and it hasn't been definitively resolved either way. There's also a far more radical and far more controversial alternative theory worth addressing directly, precisely because it sometimes gets conflated with the fabricated AI and confession videos, even though it originates from an entirely different decades-old academic debate. Geologist Robert Schoch and independent researcher John Anthony West have argued since the early 1990s that the distinctive, rounded, undulating weathering patterns visible on the walls of the Sphinx enclosure were caused specifically by heavy rainfall erosion, a weathering pattern that would require the Sphinx to have been carved thousands of years earlier than the Old Kingdom, during a much wetter climatic period in Egypt's ancient past, potentially implying an entirely unknown, earlier civilization responsible for its original construction. Schoch first presented these findings at a Geological Society of America meeting in 1992, and the theory subsequently gained wider public attention through television documentaries and West's own writing, eventually becoming one of the most widely cited pieces of evidence in broader alternative history theories about a lost, technologically advanced civilization predating known ancient Egypt. This theory has been extensively examined and, overall, rejected by the mainstream Egyptological and geological community, who generally attribute the same weathering patterns to a combination of wind erosion, groundwater seepage, acting on the specific way this particular limestone naturally degrades over time, and even earlier restoration attempts using materials that themselves eroded unevenly over subsequent centuries, rather than requiring an entirely unattested lost civilization to explain it. Critics of the water erosion hypothesis have also pointed out that similar weathering patterns appear on other structures at Giza that are securely dated to the Old Kingdom using independent evidence, suggesting the erosion pattern itself doesn't necessarily require the extreme age Schoch and West have proposed. But it's a genuine academic dispute that has played out through published papers, conference presentations, and formal responses over more than 3 decades, involving named geologists on both sides directly examining physical rock samples and presenting competing interpretations through recognized scientific channels. A completely different category of disagreement from an invented, unsourced quote attributed to Hawass in a video with no actual evidence behind it whatsoever. That distinction is really the entire point worth taking away from this. Real, unresolved questions about the Sphinx exist, and they're genuinely interesting. Which specific pharaoh commissioned it? Why its religious cult may never have been formally established during the Old Kingdom? Exactly how its distinctive weathering patterns should be interpreted. Those debates involve named scholars, published research, physical evidence anyone can go examine at the actual site, and decades of back-and-forth scholarly scrutiny. What doesn't exist anywhere in the actual historical or scientific record is Zahi Hawass secretly confessing to a hidden machine, a buried second Sphinx, or a lost civilization, after decades of supposedly lying to the public. The real Hawass, as recently as this year, was doing the opposite of confessing, publicly, on the record, by name, calling the exact radar claims behind these videos' fabrications lacking any real scientific foundation. So the next time you see a video promising that Zahi Hawass has finally revealed some shocking secret hidden beneath the Sphinx, changing everything we thought we knew, ask the same question worth asking about every one of these fabricated headlines. Where is the actual quote, the actual interview, the actual date and setting where the supposed confession took place? In the real historical record, you'll find the opposite of a confession. You'll find a formal Newsweek fact-check rating the underlying claim false. You'll find Hawass's own direct on-record rejection of the radar interpretations being used to manufacture this exact story. And you'll find something far more satisfying than any invented deathbed confession. A genuinely rigorous, decades-long scientific investigation involving fossil-matched limestone, abandoned construction blocks, a workman's forgotten lunch, and real, still open scholarly debate among people whose names and credentials you can actually verify. That's not a secret finally being told. That's archaeology, doing exactly what it's supposed to do, slowly, carefully, and completely out in the open the entire time.